The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I think our viewers and listeners could use some good news today, and we have a little bit of it here. Earlier, a few days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that North Carolina Republican state lawmakers unlawfully disenfranchised specifically black voters when gerrymandering their congressional district lines. Gerrymandering, we've talked about it before, this is the practice of drawing congressional or state legislative lines in a very strategic way to favor a particular candidate or party. We've done a long-form piece about it. We've done an interview about it. And we've especially been talking about it with respect to the upcoming 2020 census and the line drawing that's going to follow in 2021. This might ring a bell because this was the Supreme Court upholding the prior decision made by a U.S. district court in February, which at the time we reported to you, Republicans unlawfully took race into account when creating two majority black congressional districts in 2011 after the 2010 census. And the court ruled unanimously on the unconstitutionality of one of the districts. The other district had a 5-3 ruling with 3 conservatives dissenting. Interestingly and unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court has never actually said that state lawmakers can't gerrymander legislative and congressional lines to favor one party over another. So the legal problem here is specifically the racial issue. It is a win, but it's also sort of a disappointing confirmation of reality, which is you can draw districts to favor one party as long as it isn't based on race. In 2015, the Supreme Court threw out a similar lawsuit against Alabama for doing the exact same thing to black voters. So this is progress in a way. And when you look at a map of North Carolina's 13 congressional districts, which our TV audience can see now, you can clearly see these are the 2 yellow districts are the ones that were in question here. And I'll describe them to our audio audience. You have one that is incredibly narrow and is basically touching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other districts, this little sliver of land. And then you see another district in yellow in the northeastern part of the state, which sticks out into very specific cities and towns in a way that, again, is making the surrounding districts more white and more likely to all go Republican and concentrating the black voters within these 2 districts. So this is great. But again, this is a map that was drawn after the 2010 census. It's 2017. That means that these lines have been in effect for years. A lot of damage has been done. These districts were in place in 2012, in 2014, in 2016, as far as the federal level, in intra-North Carolina elections, additionally beyond that. And that's part of the problem, right? North Carolina Republicans drew these lines in 2011. They were probably aware that they were doing something that was questionable legally, but they know it's going to take, in this particular case, it was 6 years. We will get a number of congressional and state legislative wins before the Supreme Court, if they ever do, will make a decision about this. They still won.
And that's why the U.S. Census that's coming up in a few years is so important. That's why we need to reform our process when it comes to drawing district lines. And of course, gerrymandering takes 3 different forms. There's packing, stacking, and cracking.
Yes.
I think this is a clear example of packing because if you're able to put the African-American communities into 2 distinct districts, then of course they're going to be very influential in those districts, but as part of the state overall, not so much.
State legislatures can consider race when drawing lines if it helps them comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. But Republicans were doing the opposite here, right? They were drawing lines based on race in order to silence and disenfranchise black voters. And these discriminatory lines are in addition to constant attempts by North Carolina Republicans to pass voter ID laws that would suppress black votes. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that the strict voter ID laws proposed by North Carolina Republicans were unconstitutional and unfairly harm minorities. So it has been a good week for voting rights in North Carolina, more than 7 years after the census that led to this in the first place.
For now, it is. I mean, the problem here is that it comes down to a judge's interpretation. Some of these states and jurisdictions have laws where these districts have to be compact and contiguous.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there's not much regulation when it comes to this sort of thing. And the mindset is, well, I know a good district when I see one when it comes to a lot of these judges. And obviously, different judges have different political leanings as much as they try to pretend that they don't.
Yes, they do. And to all the Bernie or Busters or the Never Hillary people out there, this is why Supreme Court appointments matter. What are the chances that Donald Trump cares anything about appointing Supreme Court justices who would rule against this kind of racial gerrymandering? His record on voter suppression suggests that he wouldn't care about that. And this is exactly why we need to be aware of all of the repercussions of these sort of Manichaean black-white perspectives on never this or always that or whatever. These are multi-generational impacts that happen as a result of who's on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, when it came to the 2016 election, a lot of people were just focusing on Trump's past and Hillary's past, their expertise in different forms and their reputations. It matters a lot more, who gets the majorities in Congress, who is going to go on the Supreme Court. All these other things matter probably more.
Absolutely. We've got a great bonus show planned for you today. The American Legion calls on Donald Trump to take cannabis off of the Schedule I list of drugs to help veterans. A belligerent man in a Trump hat was kicked off of a flight set to leave China to come to Newark as the rest of the people on the plane shouted, "Lock him up." And the Texas legislature has eliminated straight ticket voting. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership and follow me on Twitter at dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Jeff Kronk. Jeff, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. This is really your show. We're funded by our viewers, by our listeners, whether it's podcast, YouTube, free speech TV, radio, television. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Your support is what keeps us on the air, particularly with the trials and tribulations of the YouTube advertiser boycott known as Adpocalypse. You can also become a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show, and do all of your Amazon shopping only after going to davidpakman.com/Amazon. That'll redirect you to Amazon. Everything you buy will send us a little kickback. Let's get to the phones. The phones are hot. 617-830-4750. We're going to take our first caller now from the 901 area code. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from today?
My name is Logan. I'm calling.
You still with us there, Logan?
David, yeah. Can you hear me?
We can barely hear you. What's on your mind today, Logan?
I wanted to ask, how do you feel about Trump possibly moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
I'm against it. I think that that's the type of unilateral move. And I mentioned this when he announced that David Friedman would be the ambassador to Israel. I am against that. I believe that is if that's something that is going to happen, it should only happen if and when it is negotiated as part of some broader agreement for peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that the unilateral move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is not recognized internationally as the capital of Israel. It is recognized within Israel as the capital, but not internationally. I think that it's a disastrous idea.
Really, I'm really surprised that you feel that. I know that you disagree with Trump on a lot of things. I mean, on virtually everything. But I do know that you seem to be pretty pro-Israel. So it surprises me that you think about that. That you feel that way.
What specifically have I said that would make you think I would support moving the embassy to Jerusalem?
Well, I mean, I guess I've just always thought that you were always pretty pro-Israel, and I didn't realize that. I thought, there have been a lot of people who have been like people in Israel who have really wanted Trump to move the embassy. It would just, I know that you have a lot of ties to Israel and stuff like that, and so it really surprises me.
What do you mean? What kind of ties do I have to Israel?
Well, I know that you a lot, and I'm not really saying ties, but I know that you heavily support them a lot, on a lot of issues, right?
Well, are there any issues in particular that you could point to where you would say I support Israel? I'm just trying to figure out what you're talking about.
Well, I'm not really saying there's an issue that you exactly support. I'm just saying that you believe that Israel should exist as a nation, that Israel should be able to exist as a nation. I thought that it would be, and when I heard you say that, I thought you would think it'd be appropriate if the U.S. could move the embassy. But thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, so it sounds like you're saying because I believe Israel. It sounds like you're saying because I believe Israel is a country that exists, that I would support the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, right?
I would think that because Israel views Jerusalem as their main capital. I thought that. I just thought because many people are heavily anti-Israel, it would just. I don't know. I've always thought that you would have supported that.
All right. Well, listen, I don't, and I'm on record as having said that. So I'm glad we've cleared up a misconception, if nothing else.
I think it's also important to point out that Donald Trump isn't as adamant now about his support about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that was about a week ago that he said, we'll see. So maybe things have changed now, but he's not all about that anymore.
All right. Well, Logan, glad I was able to dispel a false notion that you had about my views. Really, really appreciate the call. Let's continue taking calls at 617-830-4750. Let's go to our next caller from the 484 area code. Caller from 484, what's your name and where are you calling from?
My name is Xavier, and I'm calling from Pennsylvania.
Cool. What's on your mind today?
Well, I have a question regarding the death penalty. I know that there are plenty of arguments against the death penalty, like the morality of it, and also to protect accidentally executing an innocent. But I was wondering, what is your idea on that prisoners with a life sentence should have the option to request assisted suicide?
Well, the question is, should they have the right to request assisted suicide in circumstances where someone not in prison would not be able to request assisted suicide, right? Because you're not saying a prisoner who is terminally ill and has, for example, under 6 months to live, as some state laws say, requesting assisted suicide. You're saying any prisoner who has a life sentence could at any time say, I want to be killed, essentially. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, pretty much. Just like the idea that, that's at least an option you're giving, and just in case that there is an innocent, they're at least not being executed and at least have that option.
Yeah, I'm against that. I think that if we're going to talk about assisted suicide, then there should be specific rules under which it can be done under a physician's supervision. And states that have legalized assisted suicide have established that. And generally, it's some sense of, doctors sign off, and there's a sort of, I think in some cases, a two-doctor consensus that this is someone who has no more than 6 months left to live because of a medical condition, et cetera. I don't think that there should be this sort of blanket where anybody with a life sentence can request assisted suicide. And now, Xavier, is there a difference in your mind if someone has the possibility of parole versus doesn't have it? Would this only be for people who do not have the possibility of parole, or for anybody with a life sentence, even if they could be paroled?
Well, I mean, I guess the reason I was asking is because it was also like the argument of whether what's worse, execution or life in prison, and that sometimes what stumps me too. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I happen to think that, so we've gotten mixed up with this in the past with some callers, Pat, where I don't actually think that we should determine whether or not to have the death penalty based on whether it's the worst possible punishment. That I don't think that that's the standard we should apply.
Or based on what they want or don't want.
Or based on what they want or don't want, right. However, I've said that if you support the death penalty because you think it's the worst possible punishment, I happen to believe that life in prison without parole is actually worse. But I don't actually think that that's a good way to decide whether the death penalty should be legal or not.
Because it's completely subjective. I mean, one person would prefer to just be incarcerated for their entire life. Another person would just want the easy way out.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so Xavier, I'm against that, but I do think that if you're in prison in a state that has legalized assisted suicide for medical conditions, you should certainly have access to that. All right. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I like your show. Thanks for everything.
Thanks very much. We are taking calls at 617-830-4750. We're going to go to our next caller now, who is joining us from the 423 area code. Caller in 423, what's your name and where are you calling from today?
Well, I'm Cameron. I'm calling from Madisonville, Tennessee.
All right, what's on your mind today?
I was just wondering, in your personal opinion, what do you think that England should do in response to the latest terror attack?
You're talking about a law enforcement response, or in terms of whether it's surveillance, or what more specifically are you asking about, I guess?
I guess more so of a law enforcement and security look.
Well, you're going to need to decide.
What could they do to it?
You're going to need to decide at some point whether this one incident that took place at a concert venue, right, an Ariana Grande show, does that mean that you're going to significantly change the way security is done at these events? And you probably would apply it also to sporting events because it's a similar sort of security apparatus, similar types of facilities. Are you going to further inconvenience people by creating a perimeter around the venue beyond where it currently is? And for example, here in Boston, Massachusetts at Fenway Park some years ago, the security perimeter around some parts of the stadium was moved out from the stadium doors out to actually create a pedestrian street, which it is Yawkey Way, or is it Lansdowne?
It's Yawkey Way, and they're even talking about closing down Lansdowne's too, because now there's a new terrorist tactic, which is to drive a car down a crowded group of people, and they want to prevent against that.
So there's going to have to be some decision made about that, right? And I don't know where I come down on that, because on the one hand, just because 22 people have been tragically killed at this concert, the risk of being killed at a concert by a terrorist attack is still almost zero effectively. So do you want to, in a way, say, hey, yes, we are terrorized by this, and now we're going to shake up our security response because of this one incident? Or are you better off saying, you know what, we're not actually going to do that. We might scale up public CCTV camera surveillance. We might increase the use of other methods. I would hesitate, though, to go in the direction of scaling up bulk surveillance, because we've learned in the United States that it doesn't really work at preventing these types of incidents. So I think it's a tough thing. I mean, what do you think they should do?
Oh, well, as you said, it would further inconvenience people to put up further security like that, but there should be some type of screening that could be done. I mean, their security is very tight at these events.
Yeah, but again, remember, this took place outside the venue.
Yeah.
And the problem I have is if you move the perimeter another 100 feet away from the venue, when the event gets out, you'll still have the same crowd of people going from a secured area to a non-secured area. It'll just be another 100 feet further from the front doors.
We also talked about this the other day, but this venue doubles as a train station too. So if people are traveling in and out of there for a completely different reason, not even attending the concert, you can't really impede their travel.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. And I wish I had an answer, but unfortunately, I don't know what it is that you do. Appreciate the call, though. Great to hear from Mississippi.
Okay.
All right.
Great talking to you, man.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. We are taking calls at 617-830-4750. Let's go to, I don't know. What about the 918 area code? Let's try that. Our next caller from 918. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Ben from Oklahoma.
What's on your mind today?
My question is, I was wondering if you have any family or close friends that are conservative or, Trump supporters, and if so, do you get along with them, and how do you deal with that?
I don't really have any family that's conservative. I mean, most of my family is basically in, I guess we would say 3 places. It's mostly in Argentina, where it's people who are on one wing of the left or another wing of the left. In Argentina, there's way fewer of what we would call actual conservatives, particularly in the capital city of Buenos Aires. So it's sort of like an internal left debate. That doesn't mean, the debates can get pretty crazy because of what's been Argentinian politics for the last 20 years, but there's not really any conservatives. And then I've got family members in a few in Israel who are very liberal, and then a few in France who are also very liberal. So no, I don't really have any conservative family members. I do, however, have some conservative friends, people that I've known for longer periods of time. And we basically just don't talk about politics. I mean, I think you, Pat, have a much more sort of in-your-face conservative element of your family than I do.
Many conservatives in my family, many Trump supporters in my family. At least that was true during the campaign. Maybe they've jumped ship now that he's been president for a few months and things aren't going so well. Sometimes I engage in the debates. Other times I just keep it to, snarky remarks like, if Fox News is on the television, I'll be like, oh, there's still people working there? I thought everyone either had to resign or quit.
Yeah, and by the way, Fox News now third between MSNBC, CNN, and Fox for the first time in, I don't know, it could be more than 15 years that they're now last among the big 3.
Rachel Maddow's show is now the top-rated cable news show, in part because Bill O'Reilly doesn't have his program anymore. That's
true. What about you? Are you debating politics with friends and family all the time?
A lot of my friends usually I have some that kind of have an opinion and some that really could care less. Don't really
they
go
couldn't
either
care
way.
less, you mean?
And then the friends that yeah. And then the friends that do usually are kind of left-sided and don't like Trump. But family is kind of my mom's pretty liberal. My dad is a crazy, huge Trump supporter. And then I have uncles and cousins that are conservative. But so that's kind of how it is for me.
Here's one thing I would try, okay? And feel free if you try this and then call back. I've had some success with it with people who just are completely opposed on politics, but also they're kind of clueless. So they're kind of repeating talking points they don't really understand. Take an approach of don't try to argue or present other facts. Merely ask questions about how they came to the conclusions that they came to, okay? So you can Google Socratic method of questioning and read into some of Peter Boghossian's work and some other folks, and merely try to ask questions which by their very nature will get them to ultimately say, you know what, I actually don't know, and try to take apart how they came to their conclusions rather than give opposing facts.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway, if you try it, report back. I'm curious to hear how that goes. I've had some success with that, where I don't want to engage. And I say, really? And how do you know that? How did you come across that? And they say, oh, really? And do you think that that's a good way to evaluate A or B generally? And this is actually really good when people will throw out like a racist or anti-Semitic or xenophobic thing. A really good question to say is, interesting. And what do you think that says more broadly about X group? Like I once had a situation where some guy was telling me about some Hasidic Jew in New York City who he observed driving in a particular way or a particular type of car, whatever. And the person was sort of framing it like, hey, it's just an observation, I'm not
right.
And I cut right through it by saying, that's really interesting that you noticed that. What do you think that is a reflection of more broadly about these Hasidic Jews? And at that point, this person had no question but to either say, you know what, I think it doesn't really mean anything. It's just a stupid anecdote. Or saying, here is the broader stereotype I hold about the group. Very effective.
Yeah, I've seen you employ the Peter Boghossian method even with our live calls sometimes and our interviews, and it always creates some interesting responses.
Yeah. You're going to try that at next Thanksgiving, maybe?
Thanksgiving, Memorial Day.
Memorial Day would be the next time.
Right
yeah,
away.
You could get to that right away. All right, that's it for today. We will be taking calls again next week. 617-830-4750 is the number, but not the only way to get your questions on the show. After the interview we'll be doing next, we will do audience questions, which you can always send in through our website contact form at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For today's classic interview, we're going back to an interview that I actually mentioned last week, and there could not possibly be better timing for this given what's going on with net neutrality. Back in August of 2014, I interviewed someone named Kristal High, who was booked on the show under the pretense of being a sort of, a great speaker about the importance of net neutrality, blah, blah, blah. And I uncovered during the research phase before the interview that she had actually been booked by a cable industry lobbyist, also a lobbyist for the internet service provider industry. And I basically outed her during the interview. It gets sort of awkward at one point, but it is endlessly fascinating. We will go back to my interview with Kristal High about net neutrality from August of 2014. Take a look at this. I'm joined today by Kristal High, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of Politic365, and we're here today to talk about net neutrality, internet freedom. Kristal, I have to admit, I'm not particularly optimistic right now about the future of internet freedom, and when I step back, I see that we have a former cable executive, Tom Wheeler, working within the FCC. I see that we have AstroTurf groups being funded by the cable lobbies, posing as citizens groups meant to sway public opinion on the matter. And when I step back and think about 5 years down the line, I can't say I'm particularly optimistic about having a true, free, and open internet. Do you agree with me on that, or do you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think you should be optimistic, because one of the things that we're finding now around the whole net neutrality discussion is that there's a lot of vocal participation by people on all sides of the issues. I'm generally inclined to believe that, there are certain principles that everybody would agree to, right? Nobody wants their content blocked. Nobody wants to see their content degraded or slowed down. This whole notion of, fast lanes, slow lanes, I think that by and large, people are saying, no, that's not anything we're looking for, unless there are those cases where, say, you have a telemedicine app where you're talking about public safety applications or things that enhance education. So I think there's broad consensus truly around the goals that we're trying to protect in terms of preserving an open internet. I think where we're finding some disagreement and some frustration now is really around how do we get there, for one. But then, the argument has also kind of devolved, in my opinion, to this nitpicky sort of, so who's in your pocket? How are you making money? And I think that misses the point of the actual issue here. So, I mean, I'm generally optimistic that we will arrive at a solution that is beneficial to keeping the internet as we like it, to keep it as an engine of open expression and a place for commerce and entrepreneurship and ideas and innovation. But I think it's going to take some stepping back a little bit from the table and kind of throwing some rhetoric to the side and saying, hey, what is it that we're really trying to achieve here, and how do we best get that done? Well, let's take it a piece at a time. I mean, I completely agree with you that there definitely are certain basics that the general consensus seems to be kind of on board with, and you're absolutely right about that. But let me push back a little bit about the who's in your pocket thing kind of being a distraction. And I'll tell you an interesting story. You may find the story interesting. A few months ago, I was approached and I was pitched a guest. His name is Everett Ehrlich. He was the former, I believe it was Undersecretary of Commerce for Bill Clinton. And he was pitched to me by the DCI group. And I said, this sounds like a really great guest. He was pitched as like a progressive guy for internet freedom, so on and so forth. And I interviewed him. And during the interview, he said some things that started striking me kind of like the corporate talking points that I had been seeing on right-wing websites. And I said, that's interesting. Let me take a step back for a second. And I looked into the DCI group, and as it turns out, the DCI group has indeed been retained by Broadband of America. They've been creating these fake citizens groups. They are a top Republican lobbyist. They are
They have Verizon as one of their biggest clients. And I got duped, right? I booked someone without looking into who was booking them for me. And as it turns out, you were booked through the exact same organization, the DCI group. So what is your relationship to that organization? How does this all work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to describe it is that I'm someone who has, after I was in law school, and even prior to that, I've always had an interest in media and communications. It's been a platform that I think is, bar none, one of the best that we have to not only describe, what it is we want from our country, what it is we want for ourselves, but it's a platform that enables a lot, right? From ideas to commerce to anything like that.
The internet is a platform, right? That you're saying the internet is this platform.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about media, period, right, it's kind of the bastion of free expression and ideas, but the internet overlays some really interesting nuances and aspects to everything, right? Because it does make sure that we have some broader opportunities for people who might not be able to get into the media through traditional routes. And so this has been a space that I've worked in and have developed a passion for over several years now. And I think whenever you have people, particularly people of color, who are willing to kind of speak out on issues that matter to them, you find different groups, whether it's DCI group or whatever, I mean, there are PR firms all across the country that are working on both sides of the issues.
No, I understand that, but
so I think it's.
I totally understand that part, Kristal, but I mean, so you're African American, I'm Hispanic, et cetera. But I don't know that that's really, in other words, when I step back and I since you brought up that you don't think who's in whose pocket is that important of an issue, I find it very interesting that one of the issues I mentioned, which is that there are these fake consumer groups and so-called pro-citizens groups that are really right-wing lobbyists sending people around, that's a real concern to me.
Well, I mean, I think that should be a concern, but you also have to be careful to distinguish what is this so-called fake group and what are legitimate organizations that have had a long history of working towards issues of not only internet equality, but, media justice generally. And so I think that, some of the criticism we've seen lately has been a bit worrisome to me because it pits people who have, even before these consultant firms or astroturf groups have even come into existence, you have organizations that for decades, for centuries, have been working for, in some instances, a straight media justice, in other instances, it's a broader civil rights agenda, a broader consumer agenda, that when they happen to speak out on issues of importance to their constituencies, that there's somehow a problem, or like, oh, well, why are these groups talking out on these issues? I mean, I think that's the part that's troubling to me. It's assuming that an organization is an astroturf group or that an organization doesn't have a legitimate interest in the matter at hand just because of who might have pitched them or how you heard of the group or who supports an event. That's what I think is problematic to me.
That may be the case, but when we step back, there's no question, right, that DCI has been retained by a cable lobbyist and has Verizon as a client. If you're getting paid by a cable lobbyist and one of the big companies that has a stake in this, wouldn't any reasonable person question whether that is going to be an organization that has the best interest of consumers in mind or of their clients, right? I mean, there's a fiduciary responsibility to the client. You would not deny that.
Well, I would also like to think, though, that if people are out front talking about issues, if they're willing to put their reputations and their lives kind of on the line because, they are being front and center, I would like to think that these are things that these people actually believe and they're not just being puppets. But
unfortunately, Kristal, the problem with that argument is the same argument we hear when we find out that pharmaceuticals pay doctors to talk about certain medications. And when you ask the doctor says, you know what? I wouldn't talk about this medication if I didn't think it was worthwhile anyway. And then the obvious question is, then why does somebody need to pay you, right? It's the exact same issue with the front groups around net neutrality, which is if these are the positions the individuals hold anyway, why does someone feel the need to pay them?
Well, see, I don't think, and, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you have information and insight that I don't have, but from what I've seen, a lot of the organizations that are being called to the table aren't being paid to talk about an issue. They might get an event sponsorship for a program that's totally unrelated. So if you start talking about, kind of corporate social responsibility, a corporation investing in the organizations that kind of represent people who are ultimately consumers of whatever said corporation does, that to me is something that's fundamentally different than saying, hey, I am paying you.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, which is kind of why I was going to the question of, at the beginning of the interview, to kind of circle back, and I think this is fascinating, by the way. What you said was you don't think that the issue of who's in whose pocket is that important, and you now said it may not necessarily be that people are getting paid. What is the relationship here, right? Because we know that DCI is paid by Broadband of America, the lobbyist. Are individuals like you and Everett Ehrlich, are you paid by DCI?
No, I think you have to, really consider what it is you're suggesting, you're asking there. Like if people are working on different issues, there could be say a consulting arrangement that's separate and apart from whatever it is people are advocating for. So I think you just have to look at that issue.
So in other words, what you're saying is DCI may be paying you as a consultant, but they're not paying you for the media appearances or being a spokesperson, so to speak, for the point of view that their clients espouse.
Right. I mean, everybody has some sort of different kind of business arrangement that they're looking to do, and people have different ways that they make their money, that they are, however they are. I happen to be a lawyer. I also happen to be, editor-in-chief of an online magazine. I'm not exactly sure what all Ev does. I think he's a researcher or something, right. But, everybody has a different relationship. So I think you'd have to go through line by line and figure out, okay, so what are you doing? What are you doing? But if the fact of the matter remains that people are saying things that they legitimately believe, their views that they hold and have held even prior to or before any sort of relationship with whatever consulting firm, whatever group it is you're trying to call to task, I think that that person's individual views, that's what should be considered as kind of front and foremost the most important issue. I
don't disagree with you, but I do go back to this question of, if that were the case, then why are people getting paid at all, right? And the doctor medication example, I think, is the one that stands. In any case, we've been speaking with Kristal High, founder and editor-in-chief of Politic365, really helping us to shed some light on what is and is not, as she indicated, going on behind the scenes when it comes to the net neutrality discussion. Kristal, really a pleasure having you on.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's take some audience questions, good ones this week. First is from Monique, who said, hey, when will you get an electric car? Okay, so there's a few different aspects to this. Number one, I'm hugely supportive of getting off of fossil fuels. I've made it clear every time we talk about Tesla. I disclose that I have been a shareholder of Tesla for a while because I think that, I believe in the company. Why else would I have bought shares of the company? I have driven hybrids before, in the earlier days of hybrids. Like, I think it was 9 years ago, so like 3 leases ago, I had a hybrid car. In any case, I don't know when I'm going to have an electric car. My current lease is up in like 9 months. There's already so many electric car options. Now, whether they're electric plug-in vehicles versus hybrids or whatever, I'm going to assume that Monique is talking about a 100% electric car. I don't know if in 9 months I would get an electric car. I guess I'd have to check out what's available, the cost, how far you can drive on one charge, how prevalent the charging stations are, although they're becoming more and more prevalent. I'm seeing them around in more and more places. But I don't know. I mean, I think I would like to have an electric car probably within the next 5 years.
To the best of my knowledge, most of these cars that are entirely electric can only go for maybe 40 miles at a time.
Is that right?
It would
See,
have to get to a point where,
wow.
you know, you could go longer distances, you can go on road trips and everything else, and it's not an inconvenience to have one.
I thought that there were some that could go 200 miles on a charge, although maybe that's just what like the next generation Tesla will be able to do, which I don't see myself getting anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, maybe technology is moving at a fast enough rate where what I just said there was old news at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would certainly consider getting a hybrid, certainly if all other factors were the same, if it was just about the same when it comes to cost.
Yeah, the thing about the hybrids is, I don't know if you've done some of the math on them. Like, I got this hybrid years ago because I thought it was really cool, but then afterwards I found out that I probably paid something like $2,500 premium. I mean, it was a lease, but still, there was an extra $2,500 of cost figured into my lease payments. And that based on the number of miles that I was limited to by the lease, which is like 12,000, that $2,500 would not have been made up for in fuel savings. So that financially, I might have made like a legitimately bad decision by doing it. I didn't care enough to run the numbers at the time.
It seems like people are all about saving the world unless it comes at a higher price. And I'm guilty of this too. I think that's just kind of human nature.
Yeah.
But hopefully these will become popular to a point where it's just as affordable.
With the early hybrids, though, there was an issue with the disposal of the battery, where not only were you paying more and it was only a marginal improvement in gas mileage that might not even be made up, at a certain point, I don't know if it was if they had a 6, 8, or 10-year life at the time, the hybrid batteries had to be disposed of, and those were quite corrosive, not to mention the fossil fuel cost to make the battery in the first place. So there was actually a case made, and again, you read all these different things, and this is not such a central issue to my life that I can speak completely authoritatively on it, but I read some articles that claimed that if you consider the production of and disposal of the battery, you're way outdoing the benefit of an extra 15 or 20% gas mileage or whatever it was.
What's really unfortunate is that Trump is rolling back some of the Obama-era regulations when it comes to fuel efficiency standards that he had mapped out for the next 10, 20 years. So if there's going to be a trend towards more fuel-efficient cars, it's going to have to come entirely from the consumers themselves and not any government mandates.
Yeah, and that is both sad and low energy, sadly. So anyway, I don't know, am I going to get an electric car in 9 months for my next car? Probably not, but I'm going to look into it. I'm definitely going to look into it. Starting in about 6 months, I will start the research process, and I will absolutely keep you posted. April wrote in saying, is it a bad idea to loan people money? You know, it's not a bad idea for banks to do it. I'm going to assume that the question April is asking is whether it's a bad idea as an individual to make personal loans to other people. I generally think it's not a great idea.
No.
And I one time did, and I'm not talking about here's $10 because you forgot your wallet to get yourself, you know, a beer. I'm talking about loaning some amount of money where a friend comes to you and says, hey, could I borrow some amount of money that is not insignificant? I do think it's a pretty bad idea. And ones I not because I didn't get paid back, but because I didn't like the dynamic it created. A friend of mine needed some money. I think it was like when I was in college. And I worked when I was in college. So I actually had some money, which not everybody did. And a friend needed money to pay off like credit card debt or something like that. And I loaned them the money, and we came up with, you know, some interest rate and whatever. And he paid it back and everything was totally fine, but I just didn't like the dynamic of it, and I regret having done it. And if he hadn't paid it back, it definitely would have created some problems.
See, that's interesting. So he paid you interest because
he insisted on it.
Okay, interesting, because usually when friends lend each other money, that's not even something that gets brought up. So the person that lends out the money is just taking all the risk. They can't win in any way. I mean, it's going to create this awkward dynamic.
Right.
And the best case scenario is that you just get the money back that you started with and did them a favor.
And basically what happened was I said, you know, I can let you borrow the money. When do you think you can pay me back? And he said, well, I'll pay whatever the schedule was that he figured out. He said he was going to make me an extra payment, which was going to be sort of like the interest or whatever. And I think that even made it more awkward. I think the best thing is if you can afford to just give a friend money for whatever they need with no expectation that you'll be paid back, that's the best way to go about it. And if they independently say, hey, you know what? I really appreciate when you gave me that money 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. Here's the money back. That's the best way to go, with no expectation that this is money that's going to be paid back. And if you can't afford to just give someone money, I think it's got to be okay to say, you know what, that's not something that I can afford.
Right. I mean, that would be incredibly generous. I mean, you have to see it as a warning sign, too, that he's not able to make his credit card payments.
If somebody needs money in order to pay off a debt they've already close to defaulted on, maybe you're not the best person to be then loaning further money. But yeah, I'm basically against doing this. The only exception would be, there are sometimes, there are people who do real estate flips, and they will write up a contract, like it's still a legal contract, but instead of getting a mortgage because they want to flip it quickly, they'll have a group of people they know, maybe personally, and they'll go to them to finance like the cash purchase of clearly I've never done this, as you can tell, the cash purchase of a house that's being auctioned by the bank, a repossessed house or whatever, a foreclosure. And then you write up some contract, and then the idea is we fix it and flip it within 3 months, and then you get your money back plus some interest. But even then, I think, like, if you're talking about a friend's relationship, it's pretty damn risky to do that.
Right, and it obviously just complicates things when you have to get your money back. I mean, maybe lending to family is something I would consider a little bit more, because I would understand even if I don't get the return, it's going to help my immediate family members.
But that's why
their families.
I think you're better off saying it's not a loan. Listen, I'm going to help you out by giving you this money if you can afford it. And then if at some point you can pay me back, then you'll pay me back. But still thinking about it that way, It's
not a pleasant situation.
No.
Certainly not to ask for the money, not to lend it out either.
Definitely. All right, that's my thought there. Danny wrote in, is there a fad from any time that you wish would come back, or a fad you would never want to see again? Most fads I would never want to see again, I think. And the one that's coming back now is the full sweatsuit. I don't know, in my neighborhood, you see a lot of people walking around during the day with the matching, sort of like a tracksuit type of thing, like the thick sweatpants and sweatshirt material where the pants match the sweatshirt.
Same color and everything.
Same color
design.
and everything, yeah. And I'm not into that. And I wish that hadn't come back. If it's coming back, maybe my neighborhood is just very unfashionable and it's not coming back. I don't know.
Well, did you see a Kickstarter that circulated this week about the male romper? Do you even know what a romper is?
I mean, I do.
I think that would be a travesty if that was to happen.
Couldn't tell if that was for real or not.
It is.
Oh, it is.
It is for real. It's like a onesie designed for men that is both short shorts and a tank top combined into one article of clothing. It's kind of disturbing.
Was that ever in though? Like,
no.
Is that something coming back, or is that a new thing?
It would be a new thing.
Okay.
It would be a new thing.
You're sure about that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. I don't remember seeing that. But it's so actually. Wasn't there like a how am I forget? Sean Connery. Didn't Sean Connery sometimes wear sort of like a onesie in some of the old James Bond movies or something like that?
I think you get to a point in celebrity status where you're able to just pull off anything, and it's maybe not so much of a trend as his own statement that he's able to make.
Interesting. A fad that is coming back is the sort of artisanal shaving thing, which used to just be known as shaving before plastic and mass industrialization, right? With like a beaver hair, or I don't even know what it is, shaving brush and the hot lather machine and a single blade and all that. That sort of has come back.
Yeah, that's coming back with the hipsters. The answer that I would provide is absolutely 100% fanny packs. Fanny packs are convenient. I mean,
you
don't
want
have to,
it back?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to rely on your pockets. Things can slip out of your pockets. You have everything you'd ever need right in front of you. You can zip it up.
Yeah.
You can put it through your belt loop, so as long as you have your pants, you have all your belongings with you.
Sure.
It doubles as a belt. I think fanny packs need to come back today.
If you want to see fanny packs, you just go to the touristy areas of Rome on a busy day, and it's fanny packs galore.
You know, rarely do I speak about an issue this passionately. I think fanny packs have to come back.
I don't even want to see what memes are going to be on the Reddit discussion forum 24 hours from now relating to you and fanny packs.
I would propose fanny pack Fridays.
Well, it's a good thing that we work from home on Fridays. Let's put it that way. I want those snap bracelets to come back.
Oh yeah, those are pretty cool.
I'm just kidding. I was somewhere over the weekend and actually saw someone tossing them. They sort of turned, you know that game where you try to toss sort of like two bean bags connected with a rope onto ladder ball, I think it's called.
Okay, yep, that's correct.
Or it's balls connected to a rope or whatever. They were tossing the snap bracelets. I don't even know where you get snap bracelets right now, and trying to get them to snap onto the ladder steps that you would use for ladder ball.
Interesting. I think all of these fashion trends have an initial phase, and then for 10 years or so, they disappear entirely, and then they become retro and they come right back. I think that's what's happening now at the snap bracelets, because that was in during the 90s.
Carpenter's jeans were sort of in towards I think the end of the 90s, and you probably don't even know what that is.
No.
And that's fine.
Or overalls?
Carpenter's jeans are sort of like the bottoms of overalls, where you have like a place where you can put in a hammer, and it was when baggier jeans were in.
Okay.
And I hope that doesn't come back.
Sounds like an alternative to the fanny pack with all the stuff that you can carry in there.
Yeah. A lot of these fads have to do with carrying stuff around. Have you noticed that? Like different ways to bring your things from one place to another.
You have to have all your things on you as one.
I think we're better off just carrying around less stuff. That's my view. All right, that's it. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.